Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our first in-person lecture in more than a year, and our first ever to allow both in-person and at-home viewing. Yes, I think that does demand a round of applause. This is a program that we've been working on for more than a year, so it is with a very great pleasure that I am able to introduce tonight's very distinguished speaker, Professor Alexander Nemerov. But before I do, I would like to take a moment to recognize Virginia Meade and the entire Meade family. I see that we have a large portion of the Meade family here tonight. You know, as I'm sure you're all aware, our Friends Lectures are made possible thanks to a very generous endowment established by Mrs. Meade and her late husband, James C. Meade, the lecture's namesake and its most memorable presence, I think. Our guests might not know this, but the rest of us know that, at every Friends Lecture, there was always at least one great question, one very difficult question for the speaker. And so it's going to be up to all of us tonight to think of that great difficult question. I don't think we can do it to quite the same level, but that's the legacy in these events were those great questions, the probing intellect of Mr. Meade. And now on to our speaker. Alexander Nemerov is the Carl and Marilynn Thoma Provostial Professor in the Arts and Humanities at Stanford University, where he also serves as the chair of the Art and Art History Department. Before being at Stanford, he was the chair of the History of Art Department at Yale University, where he also received his PhD. During his time at Yale, he taught one of the university's most popular survey courses, a class that I actually TA'd for, and he had the opportunity to work with many brilliant graduate students and then also me. So that's part of the legacy at Yale University. In 2017, Professor Nemerov gave the 66th annual Andrew W. Mellon Lectures in the Fine Arts at the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. And he appears in the recent HBO Art World documentary, The Price of Everything. He's the author of a number of essays and books, including Fierce Poise, Helen Frankenthaler in 1950s New York, Summoning Pearl Harbor, Acting in the Night, Macbeth and the Places of the Civil War, and my own sentimental favorite, Icons of Grief, Val Lewton's Homefront Pictures. Professor Nemerov also contributed an essay to the catalog of the museum's upcoming exhibition For America, so please be sure to look out for that publication and that exhibition in November. Let me close first by plugging our exhibition that's currently on view, Moving Vision, which closes this Sunday. We will be doing another in-person event and reception on Saturday, another 5 o'clock reception, 6:30 event. That will be a conversation with some of the collectors from that exhibition, so it should be incredibly interesting. So I hope that all of you can come back or at least watch that one virtually as well. So again, that's Saturday at 5 p.m. for the reception, 6 p.m. for the event. And for now, let's all welcome Professor Alexander Nemerov.
Michael, can you get me the clicker from back there? Thank you all for joining me. Is this too loud? They'll fix it, right? Or I'll talk. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. You know, it's my first lecture not on Zoom in a while. Yeah. So, although I will keep talking until we get the volume right. I will discover again what it is to not only give a lecture to actual human beings, and I'm so grateful to you all being here. That is, people in person, but also I, have recovered the lost art of actually traveling to give lectures, and I think it's a testament to Michael, who's far too modest. That I would come here because there was a part of me, in our emails, it was like, can't I just walk up to my study and give this on Zoom? And it was so, if I can use this word, so cute that he really wanted me to come. And I'm a Midwesterner, and I'm from St. Louis, and so I thought this is a perfect occasion. And I know we were going to do this last year, so I'm really glad to be here. I'm also glad that the sound is good. And what I want to talk about here tonight is this painting, but very specifically to talk about this painting on the day of November 22nd, 1963, the day that John F. Kennedy was assassinated, but to think even more broadly, since I know you all, by virtue of being here, are interested in art and museums and history, like what do we even mean when we talk about art and history? Like how can we go beyond or below, if you like, our sort of go-to categories for, well, this happened then, and then this happened later, and so on. How can I suggest tonight, just very briefly, that it's more complicated than that, and yet crystal clear also, and that our whole sense of who we are now in relation to something like the 1880s or 1963 is trickier than we might think. So yes, so this painting made in Philadelphia in the middle of the 1880s by a very controversial artist then and there, who has since become quite renowned, but a painting whose very subject, I think, might indicate to you something of why and how Eakins was controversial in his time. The original commissioner of this picture actually turned it down. So depicting in this Whitmanian way the male nude, and more than that, right, the kind of bonhomie of men of different ages with gray hair. That's Eakins himself, or this gentleman here, posed for by his friend, the journalist Talcott Williams, and then younger men who were students of Eakins at his art academy there. It's a picture that really didn't have its like or its equivalent in its day, and maybe for that reason it remained in Eakins's house for 30 years and more on 1729 Mount Vernon Avenue in Philadelphia, unsold, etc. When Eakins died in 1916, there was a big retrospective at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Suddenly, as happens with artists, when they die, they become recognized as being the great artists they always were. And in 1925, this painting was purchased by the Fort Worth Art Association and traveled then to Fort Worth, where it's been ever since. So our story, speaking of Fort Worth, begins on late in the evening, after 10 p.m. On November 21st, where the Kennedys arrive, and they're on Air Force One, and they've come in from Houston, I believe it is, and they're going straight to, this is a more modern photograph, but it shows you what they might have seen at night. They're going to the then called Hotel Texas in Fort Worth. And, just cutting to the next morning, which of course is the morning of the fateful day, at about 8:45 a.m., JFK came out in front of the hotel. You can see there's the marquee of the hotel, and delivered a short speech to many thousands of people there. And you can see, and so I guess you could say interesting to see the Secret Service people here, but also just not only the goodwill of the citizens, black and white, but the crowds, and the kind of promiscuity of connection to the crowds that, of course, would have such a fateful and disastrous result at 12:29 p.m. that day. So we're now about 3.5 hours out from Kennedy's death. He went back inside, big ballroom at the ground floor of the Hotel Texas. 2,000 people assembled for a Chamber of Commerce event. You can see Jackie's wearing the outfit, which would become very famous later in the day. This is the speech there, at which I know he was given a cowboy hat to wear, and being very mindful of, even then, the photo ops and so on, he finessed it and said, thank you so much, and did not put it on, because he knew if he put it on, he would be, it was complicated, right? He was in Texas to win support, but also, so, just very, very carefully weighing things. Not long after that, as we switch to color, the Kennedys go out of the front door of the Hotel Texas again, and they're now going back to Carswell Air Force Base to fly the 17 miles from Fort Worth to Dallas, because you have to arrive in style on Air Force One. And many of you have seen the photographs, I'm sure, of the Kennedys arriving at Love Field. So art comes into this in an unusual way, and some of you may know this story already, but the leading citizens, political and cultural, in Fort Worth decided they really wanted to impress the first couple when they spent the one night there, and so they arranged, and in particular one person named Ruth Carter Johnson at that time, later Ruth Carter Stevenson, she arranged to have a show of really fine works of art to demonstrate that Fort Worth was a cultural center, and she borrowed different works and had them displayed in the Kennedys' suite, Suite 850. And you'll keep in mind, you already saw they arrived in Fort Worth late, like 11. They got to the hotel just before midnight, and Kennedy was giving his speech at 8:45 the next morning. There wasn't a lot of time to appreciate this art, but it was a labor of love, and this is one of the people responsible for it. Owen Day, art critic in Fort Worth, who's posing next to this John Marin picture. And why is he smiling on November 22nd? It's because it's after the Kennedys have checked out, but before he's been killed. So, 10:30. Another figure here who is responsible for this is this guy, Sam Canty III, and he's shown admiring this painting by Claude Monet of Monet's granddaughter, with then this sculpture called Angry Owl by Picasso. And Angry Owl is the subject of an interesting photograph where Angry Owl is being buckled in, though I don't know how much good that seatbelt would do, as Angry Owl would be precipitated through, not the windshield, but the dashboard, I guess, of this car if there were any accident. But that is Ruth Carter Johnson, and then this is the wife of an oil baron who owned this Picasso sculpture and several of the other works in the show. In 2013, in Dallas and in Fort Worth, they did a recreation of this exhibition, this one-night exhibition, and this is in fact how I came to know about it. And this floor plan of Suite 850, which no longer precisely exists in the same floor plan or design, gives you a sense of the space of it, with a smaller bedroom here, which seemingly would be the room in which Kennedy slept, and then a larger room, the master bedroom here, where Jackie would sleep. You can see some of the pictures and sculptures arrayed here, including this Van Gogh painting owned by Ruth Carter Johnson that would go over the bed of the master bedroom, and in the master bedroom, and then the Eakins painting, which you know from the first slide, would go above the guest bedroom or the second bedroom or the bed in it. So interesting. You see this here, that's a window, and the Secret Service said, Mr. President, I know that they want you to sleep in this room, that this is the bedroom that you've been assigned, but no, this is a security risk because there's a window there, so you're going to sleep here, and Jackie will sleep here. So Kennedy, the last night of his life, he slept below this Van Gogh painting from Van Gogh's Paris period, but he was slated to sleep under the painting I want to talk about tonight. And Jackie was an art history major, so this was the fancy room with the French paintings and the European paintings. And Jack had more kind of the rugged American room. They ended up switching bedrooms, and Jackie ended up sleeping in this bed here. You can see the sheets are not still unchanged the next morning, but there it is. There's our painting. And this is a painting by Charles Russell called Lost in a Snowstorm, We Are Friends. But what interests me about this is how do we go beyond just saying, well, that's fascinating. I mean, wow, that picture that I could see in Fort Worth now, it had that distinction of being there. And, I guess I want to make something of this. And I don't really want to rely on anything to do with intention or anything, because I can tell you a couple things. One, Kennedy never even noticed this stuff. Or if he did, he thought it was reproductions of art. And even Jackie, the next morning, she said, that's a Van Gogh painting. So in other words, they got in at midnight and then whatever, it's a surprise, and then they are just looking around, and it becomes clear that this is such a great gesture, but they have to go and they're gone. However, interestingly, the last phone call Kennedy ever made was to Ruth Carter Johnson, thanking her for the show. Now, that said, what I'm about to say tonight does not have to do with any kind of intention. The paintings just happen to be there, but let's make something of this one in particular. And what I want to suggest tonight is that there are three ways that this picture resonated or resonates ongoingly with Kennedy's life and death there and then. So let's think about how this is so. And the first would have to do with Kennedy's wartime experience in the Second World War. As some of you may know, he was a very young commander on a PT boat, like a little armed boat. You can see the gun here in the South Pacific. And you get the sense just right off the bat that if we're going from the naked men outside Philadelphia in Eakins' picture, that this is, in its own way, a version of the same story, the same mythology. We were young once. We're almost like boyishly skinny, augmented by the poor diet of the war, but etc. This right here is interesting to me, but beyond that, just thinking about how the book PT 109 by Robert Donovan was actually a very important bit of campaign literature. Up to and around the time that Kennedy was elected, this book, which came out in 1961, was part of the public relations campaign to make him an American hero, like an accessible figure to all. And in the book, Robert Donovan tells the true story of PT 109, just a little boat, idling in the water one night off an island in the South Pacific, and a large Japanese cruiser, a big ship, comes in and just splits it in half out of the dark, and then sails away. So the men you saw some of them are dead, all of them are in the water. What to do? Kennedy, who was a good swimmer, takes one man on his back and swims for the next island. And supposedly some of JFK's many health problems later in life came about because of this one Herculean effort. In any case, PT 109 is very much about that heroic episode, being a true war hero, saving the life of another person, an ordinary American. So when the Amon Carter Museum said, "Hey, can you do something about this, or would you write about Suite 850?" First thing I thought of is when they told me about the Eakins painting, being there is I said, oh, that's what I want to write about, even though I didn't know what kind of connections or any kind of connections there might be. I just felt it. And one thing I felt is that if I got a copy of PT 109, I bet in the photo spread there would be something that was interesting. I just knew it. So I ordered it, it arrived, and it was interesting because in the photos they have the author, and I guess authors were more manly than I can claim to be, because in none of my books do I appear swimming in any way. But Robert Donovan is, in an able-bodied way, and without a burned, broken sailor on his back, is nonetheless, recreating the route of Kennedy's swim, and is photographed by the very young Elliot Erwitt, who went on to become quite a distinguished photographer. So, looking at this, I thought, well, this is interesting, because it right away puts me a little bit in a kind of time warp. And again, I'm not talking about Kennedy getting in from Houston bleary-eyed and going over papers with his aides and saying, hey, that painting, so much like, no, it's not. This is not about that. It's just saying that Kennedy's experience as let's call it an experience of male bonding in the war, just somehow, coincidentally but powerfully, resonated with what this painting was showing, the painting under which he was supposed to spend that night. And I was thinking about this in the context of the literature of that time. Like the early 60s, when the war, how with Vietnam, a lot of the really powerful Vietnam movies came out in the 80s, right? Which makes a lot of sense, because there needs to be a little delay, and then Platoon and Full Metal Jacket and so on can appear. Well, how about 1961, 62? PT 109 is part of this world where suddenly, something to do with the real war is appearing. And so I'm going to give you 3 examples of this, all by 2 by war veterans and 1 by a writer who wrote one of the most famous novels of the Second World War. So the first is the poet James Dickey, who's most well known for the novel Deliverance, but who was a war veteran and who I met once when he was about 10 years old, or I was about 10 years old. He was a friend of my dad's, and he was definitely a tall tale teller, I'll say, but a wonderful poet. This poem, The Lifeguard, 1962, not to do with the war, but you can just hear it, feel it. Just tonight, the resonance with the story I told you about the Kennedy saving mission is there. So The Lifeguard, I'll read it to you. In a stable of boats I lie still, from all sleeping children hidden. The leap of a fish from its shadow makes the whole lake instantly tremble. With my foot on the water, I feel the moon outside. This is South Carolina, Georgia. Dickey's from down there. Take on the utmost of its power. I rise and go out through the boats. I set my broad soul upon silver, on the skin of the sky, on the moonlight, stepping outward from earth onto water in quest of the miracle. This village of children believed that I could perform as I dived for one who had sunk from my sight. I saw his cropped haircut go under. I leapt, and my steep body flashed once in the sun. Dark drew all the light from my eyes. He's underwater. Like a man who explores his death by the pull of his slow-moving shoulders, I hung head down in the cold, wide-eyed, contained and alone among the weeds, and my fingertips turned into stone from clutching immovable blackness. Time after time, I leapt upward, exploding in breath, and fell back from the change in the children's faces at my defeat. Beneath them I swam to the boathouse with only my life in my arms to wait for the lake to shine back at the risen moon with such power that my steps on the light of the ripples might be sustained. The light of the ripples. Beneath me is nothing but brightness like the ghost of a snowfield in summer as I move toward the center of the lake, which is also the center of the moon. I am thinking of how I may be the savior of one who has already died in my care. The dark trees fade from around me. The moon's dust hovers together. I call softly out, and the child's voice answers through blinding water. Patiently, slowly, he rises, dilating to break the surface of stone with his forehead. He is one I do not remember having ever seen in his life. The ground I stand on is trembling upon his smile. I wash the black mud from my hands. On a light given off by the grave, I kneel in the quick of the moon at the heart of a distant forest and hold in my arms a child of water, water, water. That is a World War II poem, among other things. No one, I feel like no one could say that that's not haunted by 1943, 44, 45. Saving, dreaming, living, dying. My second example, remember I'm giving you three from that time, is personal, because if you look at this copy of Poetry magazine, it says November 57, the first author there in this volume has my same last name, and in fact that's my father, who was a World War II veteran. A Day on the Big Branch, it's called. And when I think of the Eakins painting about swimming, about men together, being in that hotel room, you might be saying, well, that's a painting from 1884, but 85, but no, on that day, it's also a painting of 1963. Just like anytime you go to any museum, like this museum, and you go look at a work of art, the date of that work of art is the day you see it. Each one of us makes that day anew. Each work of art exists originally for our inspection, whether we wanted to or not. But think how lovely it is when you actually lean into that experience. You make the work, not an expert or even the artist in a way. So my dad wrote this poem, A Day on the Big Branch. It's about playing poker all night with his buddies at Bennington College, including the president of the university and the gas station attendant, like a true democratic assemblage of hard-drinking, cigar-smoking people. And the next morning, the next day, they're all drunk and besotted and feeling bad, and they go to swim at this kind of cascading Vermont. It's not a falls, but a kind of pool and rapids and so on. And in this poem, they get there, and these are just excerpts, but he says, it was as promised, this place of swimming, of lounging on the rocks, of wonder, with granite walls, and this is again so much about the war, enclosing ledges, long and flat, of limestone, or rolling of lava. Within the ledges, the water fast and still, pouring its yellow light and green over the tilted slabs of the floor, blackened at shady corners, falling in a foam of crystal to a calm where the waterlight dappled the ledges as they leaned against the sun. Big blue dragonflies hovered and darted and dipped a wing, hovered again against the low wind moving over the stream, and shook the flakes of light from their clear wings. This surely was what we had come for, was nature, though it looked like art with its gray fortress walls and laminated benches as in the waiting room of some petrified station. But we believed, and what it was we believed, made of the place a paradise for ruined poker players, win or lose. And eventually he says, after a time we talked about the war. about what we had done in the war and how near some of us had been to being drowned and burned and shot, and how many people we knew who had been drowned or burned or shot. And would it have been better to have died in the war, the peaceful old war where we were young? But the mineral peace or paralysis of those great stones, the moving stillness of the waters entered our speech. The ribs and blood of the earth from which all fables grow established poetry and truth in us, so that at last one said, I shall play cards until the day I die. And another said, in bourbon whiskey are all the vitamins and minerals needed to sustain man's life. And still another, I shall live on smoke until my spirit has been cured of flesh. So just right here with my dad's poem, but also the Dickey poem, you have this sense of the elegiac feeling of the Second World War in the early 60s. And one figure in Eakins' painting that, for me, I think really centralizes this idea. It's the most prominent figure, one of the younger people, one of the students who's posed so heroically, but I think you could also say anatomically there, waiting his turn to take a dive. And when I say anatomically, I mean because Eakins really studied anatomy. He dissected bodies. And, you know, this, if we really look at this figure, he's really not exactly Greek in the sense that a truly, like, beautifully proportioned, you don't feel like Michelangelo's David, actually. You don't think about, like, tendons and sinews, but Eakins really understood, like, calf muscles, for example, because he had dissected bodies, right? So this is something I'm thinking about with this as we think about that night or that day, November 22nd. And here's the idea. This figure reminds me a lot of an episode in probably, well, then the most famous book to be written, novel to be written about the Second World War, Joseph Heller's famous Catch-22. And in this kind of absurdist story, whose realism is its absurdity, there's a story of this guy, his name is Kid Sampson in the book, and he's out swimming because there's not a lot going on around the Air Force base where they're stationed, and one of the other guys is also, you know, just playing a prank. He flies his B-25 in, the twin-engine plane, in real low, just sort of wag the wings, you know, right over the water where Kid Sampson is bathing. And Kid Sampson thinks that it would be fun to just kind of reach up and just touch the belly of the B-25 as it goes by. Meanwhile, the guy flying the plane just miscalculates and flies a little too low. One of the props just cuts him right in half. Just like that. And everyone's screaming and running out of the water, and that's what it is. Just like that, you're reading this, you know, in many ways hilarious and absurdist novel, and then these things happen in it. And this is like the constant payout of trauma, right? And with Eakins, you know, I cannot not see that, as I said, the anatomical or dissected feeling of his figures who are graceful, beautiful, mortal. Graceful, beautiful, mortal. You know, works of art. It's hard to say this and for us to experience this in a non-didactic way, in a non-kind of buzzkill way, but they make requests of us. You know, they generate emotions and attitudes in us. This figure, we all had a kind of group meeting around this painting in Fort Worth, I think we'd soon say, yes, what kind of body is it? It's immortal. It's a mortal body, not an immortal body. It's a body in time, a body of flesh and bone. I want to come to my second way that I think this painting, again, not intentionally, really resonates with the event of that fateful day. And if you look at Eakins' painting, some of you may already have felt that it's interesting because although we would never say that it's one figure shown 6 times, there is the sense a little bit of, sequential, like a sequential image of one figure. And in fact, if you do feel that, you wouldn't be wrong exactly, because Eakins was instrumental in bringing the founder of sequential photography, stop-action photography, Edward Muybridge, from California to Philadelphia in 1881. And ultimately, Muybridge published his Studies in Animal Locomotion, which consists of 781 plates of showing just like this, right? Almost inventing motion pictures, right? And Eakins himself, and so you see the connection here, I think, across the screen, just a general feeling that this is very Muybridge-like, very interested in motion, the body in motion, defeating the ideas that paintings just show static, frozen moments. And in fact, Eakins himself, who was a real polymath, took photographs like this as well, like this one from 1884. And you can just feel it, maybe especially in this area, that he's imagining a picture that shows a sequence of actions. Why is that relevant to our story? Well, the most famous 26 seconds, if you like, Muybridgian seconds in all of American culture is the Zapruder film. Maybe the greatest work of art, American work of art. And if you define work of art as being something that is just so real, there's nothing to do except look away or look at it, possibly both at the same time. How many works of art can you say that about? So this is a connection which is quite literal, because we have the origins of this kind of motion photography here, the motion photography out of which this painting is made, and then just on the very day when the president wakes up, not beneath this painting, but might as well have been, becomes the subject of the most famous motion picture sequence in American history. It's just, we live in larger streams of history than we care to acknowledge. Speaking of intentionality, on any given day, even an ordinary one, we're all subject to forces, vast forces, of course, historical forces that we have no say in. We're along for the ride, and all I'm pointing out is that stream here. So another connection of this picture. And I think when I think about what in swimming actually really brings the Kennedy assassination, where does the Kennedy assassination, to put it this way, actually appear in the painting? Of course, that's impossible, but I try to think beyond just oh, there's this thing over here and there's that thing over there. No. For me, it's in the diver, a detail of which you see here. The snuff, the moment of snuffing out there where his face making the dicky-like, corona or wreath of water flecks hits this kind of nothingness here. You could say, well, is that right? And one thing I tell my students is, I'm too old to be right. I'm more interested in thinking and making things appear and drawing connections. That's my definition of what I do. Being right is for younger people than me, and also people who believe that the world is simple. Here's my third point here tonight, which is, I guess it has to do with Catholicism. Kennedy, of course, is a Catholic president. I was struck one time reading an account of Eakins from an art historian in the 1940s where he's talking about the Signorelli-like figures. And I thought that was interesting. He's referring to the Renaissance painter Luca Signorelli, whose most famous work is this resurrection scene at Orvieto Cathedral. And it kind of makes sense because Signorelli in his day was very interested in anatomy. And if you just mentally picture one of Michelangelo's contemporary nudes, these bodies look a little bit different as they rise up out of the earth on Resurrection Day to the trumpeting of the angels. What to make of this, I think, is that Eakins' painting is a very Catholic painting, even though it's made there in the heart of Protestant Philadelphia. But Eakins trained in Europe and studied the old masters, and his painting is not a resurrection, but it is in a way about the remnants or what resurrections have become in a secular context. You know, this is sort of some of the beauties and wonders of the history of art. Resurrections, Judgment Day becomes a day at the swimming hole. But it's still there. This pathos is still there. People have said about this, and I think they're right. Wow, it seems like there's such a lot of gravity and pathos for these guys going swimming. You know, what's up with that, right? And it's true. It's more than that. It's not just, in fact, it is called swimming, not the swimming hole, because, you know, swimming hole implies something very much more casual. It's something, there's something intense that's happening here. And the way I understand it is that these guys, how I put it to myself, these guys are like refugees from a Last Judgment. They're still doing all the things, still climbing out of the water, still rising up, but they've kind of forgotten the purpose, or the culture has forgotten the purpose in the name of which they would have risen or sunk. But it's still, in effect, an altarpiece there in Suite 850. Kennedy's, you know, his last picture, in a way, like a Catholic picture. And when I think of the last rites being administered to Kennedy at Parkland Hospital at 1 p.m. that day, I think of this, you know, with the oil being him being anointed with the oil and so on. I think of this painting very much in the same breath. I think of it as, in effect, like a kind of Catholic summation of his life, right? If we come back to this, though, last, let me say this. Everything I've said would suggest that the painting is, as it were, kind of like Abraham Zapruder, like an innocent bystander who just happens to be there and then participates in this and can be woven into the story that I've told. But I want to suggest that something which I haven't said within the picture portrays everything I've said. You know, licenses and allows everything that I've said. And what is it? Well, we look at it swimming, so it's guys diving off of a, you know, a rock face, and it's in the country, and what more is there to say? Well, it's not a rock face exactly. It's not a natural phenomenon. It's you could say it's a pier, but it's actually a foundation of a building. And, you know, people who have researched this have discovered that, well, this is an 18th century building. And it was once in the middle of a field. This pond, this lake was flooded on purpose to create water around there. So there's nothing natural or given about the water. But to come back to the foundation, I want us to think about that in connection to history. And this is how. Can you imagine being the farmer in 18th century outside Philadelphia, and if someone told you, hey, in fewer than 200 years, there'll be naked men jumping off of your foundation of your non-existent building into water? He would say you're crazy. But, of course, in hindsight, we know that such a thing is, of course, perfectly possible. Historical change, we could call it, but I think it's maybe a little richer than that. I mean, I think by virtue of painting this very mutable place where something impossible could happen, I think Eakins is acknowledging that a painting also, like this foundation, goes out into a world that it cannot predict, it's not Nostradamus, doesn't know it's going to be in suite 850. But one thing it does know for sure is it's going into worlds that it can't know, and that at times it will sync with those worlds really perfectly and powerfully. Eakins' language of pathos, of gravitas, of the mortality, the anatomical vulnerability of the body, this is what works of art are. They deliver in these sort of they deliver to the person or the circumstance who is ready to receive their gravity and their power. And that may not happen for years. Remember, this painting was in his own house, shuttered away for 30 years after he painted it. But paintings are patient. I'm going to Fort Worth. Okay, I'll go to Fort Worth. And then one day, at least in my way of thinking, because paintings are always forward events as well as past events, it resonates incredibly powerfully by just happening to be there, but through a process that it knows is out there, just as Eakins knows that this foundation has become a diving platform. So, in a certain respect, what could be more mild than going to an art museum and looking at a painting on the wall? It's got the nice frame, the didactic material, all this. But paintings themselves are historical events, and sometimes they connect with other events in such a way that they become more than they were to begin with, and give us, as I hope we can all feel at times in our life, give us pause. Thank you. Thank you, my first live audience in so long. So I think I remember how to do this. Can I take a few questions? So yes, please, you could ask me anything. Go ahead. Yes, right here, and I'll repeat the question. So your father was at Pearl Harbor and was in the submarine corps, and he remembers swimming, and he remembers the bodies in the water. Yeah, so, and yeah, water images, right, so there you go. And oil still leaks from the Arizona, as many of you know. So history, it's not in the past. It's like Faulkner says, the past, it's not even past. And it's not. So this is, when I said at the start about time and history, this is what I'm thinking of. We, pardon the expression, but we really like to quarantine the past to something that doesn't concern us for the most part. But it does because it's right here. Well, this was a movie theater. You know, you can't escape it, but it's, I would say, you know, because my father was really temperamentally averse to the past, and he avoided archives, you know, as so much dust and cobwebs, whereas my mother really loved the past. But I would try to split the difference and say, like, being in that space, Pearl Harbor, this painting is more alive to me by virtue of its past, its way of feeling haunted by Suite 850, than if I'm just wanting to approach it fresh, you know, fresh as a daisy. So I think that's a question for us, right? Is we want to live in the moment. Butterfly, that's, oh my God, and that's true. I'm not demeaning that. I try to remind my students that the shadow of the palm tree at Stanford, like, just kind of wavering on the sidewalk, like, you know, how could Michelangelo top that, right? But there's also, you know, those who are not here, or things that kind of pay out a kind of pain over time. That's powerful. That's life affirming to remember that and experience that too. So thank you for that. Do you want me to paraphrase that? Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think it's interesting to teach this to 19-year-olds. Well, thank you. Yeah, thank you. I think, you know, sometimes people say, well, what is art history exactly? And you know, one definition is there's a bunch of people on a tour bus. Everyone can see the cathedral or the palace or whatever it is. The art historian is the jerk who grabs the microphone and starts speaking what everyone can already see. That's one definition. But another definition is that, which of course is the one I hold as an ideal, is that words should not be secondary. You know, that something is not seen because it is visible, but visible because it is seen. Right? So my students, my graduate students will say, what is art history? Maybe they've never quite asked me that, but that's the gist of a lot of conversations, and it's putting words to what you see. It's that, or it's nothing. Nothing. And not some of the time, but all of the time. And teaching it to 19-year-olds, it's tough. Do I ban computers in my classroom? Remember that? You remember that? Were you there when I was there? I mean, when that happened? Oh, I finally said no internet in the classroom. Man, oh, the outrage. More from alums than from the actual students. But anyway, it's hard, I guess is my point. It's hard. Zoom has its advantages, you know. People go dark. Hey, I don't know what they're doing. But to not be cynical. I was talking to Michael tonight, like I was saying, God, I can just tell from your emails that you love this. Yeah, you know, and that's the only way to do it. Right? You can't. It doesn't matter how many times you walk away a little down or defeated or feel like you poured your heart out and someone comes up and says, what's on the midterm? You know, like you can't, you just have to still love it, right? And it's not like I need to tell myself that because I just do. And I think behind the love is presumably what you all share by being patrons of this museum, which is you must be moved by art, and you must feel that it adds something to your life. And so to live in some proximity to that, and by art I mean poetry, movies, whatever it is, you know, that's an ethic. It makes, as I say to my students, like the humanities will teach you nothing except they'll make the blades of grass on the lawn grow straighter in your gaze. You know, the whole world is like, oh my God, I'm alive. The world is alive too. That's all it does. Nothing else. Yeah, that's all. Do we have time for one more? Yeah? Okay, yes, please. Yeah. That's such a great question. What was my process? I wish it could be, I wish I could say it was really scientific, but I'm a very intuitive thinker. And when they called me, they said you could write on anything. They told me that Eakins was there, and that's a painting I've known about for a long time. Back in 1985, when I was an undergraduate at the University of Vermont, I wrote my senior thesis on Thomas Eakins. But I'd always been bored by that painting. And then suddenly, on that phone call, I just felt, that's it. I'm writing on that. I just knew. I knew there would be something there. And then, you know, my critics, and there are many of them, believe me, say, well, of course, you stacked the deck, you found what you wanted to find. And I guess even at age 57, I'm kind of working out how to respond to that, because in my younger days, I think when I was like the cool young professor, I guess I wasn't really that cool or young, but anyway, bear with me. I think I got all defensive, like, no, you know, like, it is true, or whatever I would say, you know. I still wish I had back this time at the Victoria and Albert Museum in 2005 when this English guy, after hearing one of my talks, you know, I called on him. He said, I've been listening with increasing incredulity. You know, like, I wish I wasn't so nice back then, and I wasn't so polite, because I would have said something to him. But anyway, so my evolution is that I think art history is an art. It doesn't have to be right, as you've heard. It shouldn't be BS. You know, it should be from the heart, but it's a creative act in league with the art that brings the past alive, makes it consequential, reminds us of the sort of ethical and even kind of spiritual relationship we have to artifacts, to things, to history, to the present. And as I say to my students, and this is the last thing I'll say tonight, you know, it's not writing about art, it's writing with art. All right, thank you.